All right, let's get started. I'm really excited to have Speaker Clarno here today. Welcome to the Oregon State Capitol Foundation Speaker Series. It's Women's History Month, so we had earlier this month we had the authors who did the book about Norma Paulus. It actually was about a week ago, so that was great fun. And then you today, so we're really excited. The Capitol Foundation works to enhance the beauty and the dignity of the Capitol and to connect Oregonians with their government and bringing them into the building, and we're really excited about that. Today, Bev Clarno is back in the building. She served as state representative from '89 to '97, serving as speaker in the 1995 session. She returned as a senator in 2001 until 2003 when she resigned to take a position with George W. Bush administration as a representative for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today. How long do you think your presentation is going to be?
Probably 30 minutes, unless I slow down, then it might be 40 minutes.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Okay, so when she's done, then there'll be opportunity for questions. One thing that we try to do, because we are streaming, and so the people that are watching the video can't hear the questions.
Okay.
And so either,
I'll repeat it.
Yeah, if you'll just repeat the question.
Okay.
So that they know what's happening. And then we will have is it YouTube video, or how's the video through
It's through OregonLegislature.gov. It can be downloaded after the presentation, or you can rewatch the presentation in full. And then right after questions and answers, Ms. Clarno will be signing books in front of the Capitol store, and we'll have some refreshments for everybody.
Okay, let's get started.
Thank you.
All right, and if you can turn down the cell phones, that'd be cool.
Let's hope you did. Or you're going to be fired from your job. Well, I want to thank Stacy. She just left the room, but I want to thank her for putting this all together. And of course, Joan Plank, who I worked with for many years in the legislature. And I want to thank all my relatives sitting in the second and third row that came from Sutherland and Hillsborough and Rachel, what do we say, Warren, Oregon? Really delighted to have you here. And of course, I'm very delighted to have a member of the Senate that I served with, Vern Duncan, here, and a wonderful person that's always run this building. Good to have you here today. And I'm very happy to have my husband here today. I dedicated my book to him because every time that I didn't work on it every single day, he said, "Have you worked on your book today?" And I got so darn tired of hearing that, I finally finished it. And Karen Mainzer, hi, thanks for all your help. I was hoping Senator Courtney would be here, and I want to tell him, as I hope he's watching, he'd better be, but he was instrumental in bringing his caucus along when I was elected Speaker of the House, as I had some rogue Republicans who were not sure they were going to vote for me. And Senator Courtney is so concerned about the process, he said, "My caucus will vote for you." And it hadn't been done in 35 years. So I think that's what you call bipartisan politics. I also, Stacy, you were out. I thanked you for the foundation putting this together. And of course, Jackie at the gift shop where my books will be for sale. I have been asked why I wrote a book. Well, as I served in the legislature for nearly 20 years, people would say, "What's it like? What's it like over there in Salem?" Well, just saying, "Oh my God, you don't want to know," was not a very good answer. So I thought I'd write a book and explain what the legislative process was about. I also wanted to assure young people that they could be anything they want to be if they tried hard enough and they cared hard enough. My book starts with my early life and adversity. My dad was a logger and the oldest of 12 in the Boyce family from Langless, Oregon, where I was born. That's below Bandon, if you don't know where Langless is. My parents divorced when I was 6 years old, and my mom took us by Greyhound bus during the war to LA with my aunt, where we lived for a while. I attended 4 first grades. We ended up in my uncle's dairy in Redmond. In those days, there weren't government programs, so there certainly wouldn't have been any sought out by my mother. We just went from relative to relative. After my mother married my stepfather, our life was hell. Today, with what happened to my brother and I, my stepfather would have been in jail. My brother and I ran the farm. We irrigated, set canvas dams. If you haven't done that, you don't want to know. We worked the fields and put up hay. We farmed with a team of horses and picked potatoes for 6 cents a sack. After graduation from Redmond High School, we moved to Wasco, Oregon. That's in Sherman County. I married and had 4 children. I was involved in my community and everything. Sunday school teacher for 18 years, a Cub Scout den mother for 9 years. I say that's the best training I had for being Speaker of the House. During this time that my children were all in school, I went into the hog business with my brother-in-law. We did this for several years together. Later, I was divorced and found myself in the city for the first time in my life with no job skills. I checked the paper, the Oregonian. There was no ads for a hog manager. So I took a real estate class, and they said to set some goals. So I set 4 goals. I'd always wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to serve in the legislature and get my pilot's license. Took me 10 years, but I got my goals done. My goal in serving in the legislature was prompted by a very bad experience with the government agencies who inspected my hog operation. They were overbearing, condescending, and arrogant. And I thought I needed to go into the legislature and change that. Well, also I learned early on how different things are in the city from a small town in Wasco, Oregon. One weekend I came up to my hog farm and hauled a load of hogs to my apartment complex. The next morning I got up and carried buckets of water downstairs and fed my hogs and was soon on my way to Rickreall for the gilt show. The next day at work, a lady said, "What'd you do over the weekend?" I told her, and she says, "Oh, don't you know you can't park a load of pigs in the front of your apartment complex in Lake Oswego?" I said, "Really? Over in Eastern Oregon, you can park them anywhere you want." 8 years later, I met Ray. Ray was just retiring from Carnation Company as vice president, and his Central Oregon grandparents and roots were calling him. For me, I just remembered the rattlesnakes and how big the mosquitoes were and the hard times of my early life. Ray bought a ranch east of Bend, and I worked as a court reporter in the Deschutes County Courthouse. And an open seat came up, so I had an opportunity to fulfill my last goal. I knew nothing about campaigning. Asking friends and family for money to pay expenses was the hardest thing I ever had to do. Ray finally took out a mortgage on the ranch to fund my brochures and expenses of campaigning. By the way, I did get him paid back. I went door to door. I carried water in the car and my lunch, and I visited 10,000 doors in my primary. My primary opponent was the mayor of Bend, and my general opponent was a teacher who bragged to me that she was funded by the OEA. Serving in the legislature is a privilege, but campaigning is the pits. After a hard-fought campaigns, I walked into the Capitol, and I remembered my 8th grade tour. The gold seals on the doorknobs, the gold man on top of our building with the axe. I stood there and said to myself, I remember thinking in the 8th grade, you have to be really smart to serve here as a legislator. 40 years later, I found out it wasn't necessarily so. My first term serving in the legislature was a very steep learning curve for a small town farm girl. I'm always very grateful and thankful to my close friends and advisors that first year. They came in as freshmen with me, Greg Walden, and my majority leader in '95, Ray Baum. After serving one term as Speaker, I ran for state treasurer, After a statewide campaign, I lost, but I won 33 of 36 counties. The next day after my loss, I was in the speaker's office, kind of looking at my wounds and thinking about what I'd done wrong. And the secretary came in and said, "You have a call from Vice President Dole." Well, I assumed it was kind of a joke, but I said hello, and it was Bob Dole. He said, "I know losing's hard, but hang in there and stay involved in politics and continue to work for good government." Here was a man comforting me who had just lost his race for the highest office in our land. So I look back and reflect about the only race I ever lost, and I think, well, I got to ride my horse in 14 parades all over the state, and I met the most wonderful people we have in Oregon. My advice to anyone seeking public office: do not run because you think it would be fun to be in the parade. Campaigning is like putting your life in a blender, and there is no off button. Leadership is the chapter where I discuss floor sessions, my view on the difference between Republicans and Democrats, and the training I took the first year I was elected to become a welfare caseworker. I explain how holding a leadership position means there is always some self-serving, ego-driven members who are constantly challenging you, criticizing you behind your back, and generally undermining your efforts at every turn. In the government agencies chapter, I discuss the multitude of issues I dealt with, the over 25,000 cases of child abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse. I was on the committee to review the 28 children's deaths. I didn't sleep well after hearing the atrocities I heard. There were women's boyfriends, drug-induced boyfriends, pouring pepper down a 6-month-old child until he choked to death. Or hearing of a baby brought to an emergency room with over 300 cigarette burns on the little body. I also traveled to Lapine with caseworkers on a visit. We visited a 6-year-old boy who was born severely drug addicted and rocks on his head all day long. His grandmother talked to me and she says, "I'm illiterate, but I'm doing the best I can to take care of him." She said, "We lived in Arizona and they didn't have any programs to help us, and they bought me a Greyhound ticket to bring him to Oregon where there are programs where we could get help for him." On another visit to a little girl who was not in school, she was pregnant at age 13. She told us that ever since she was 6 years old, her dad pimped her in a lineup of men as long as she can remember. I also discuss in the government chapter how I've tried to privatize the state motor pool, only to be met with the power of the unions, where they sent out a letter to all members of the legislature saying this would be an absolute disaster. Their many letters and warnings made me realize the elected officials and the public are not in charge of government, the unions are. In 1995, Senator Timms from Burns and Senator Miller from Lake Oswego and I traveled to British Columbia to ascertain how they had privatized their highway department. We were told by the former union members that they fought it very hard, but now they own it and they're very happy with the private operation of the department, buying it from the British Crown. I think the PERS issue is one of the worst things for our counties, cities, and state government and schools. I'm very involved with our school bond over in Redmond, and I will tell you that what it's costing our school is just many, many teachers. And until the unions come to the table, the PERS liability issue will never be solved. In the waste and outrage chapter, I discuss the many atrocities that I came across in government, such as, an audit of the energy department that showed it sold at auction a drilling rig for $50,000. It was repaired for $71,000 and now offered by an equipment broker in Texas for $3.9 million. Many whistleblowers told me of workers who are idle or working, at half speed and in many cases following regulations that should have never been written. One whistleblower called me and said their manager said she had to have a minority position filled and to hire anyone regardless of whether they had any experience. I was elected to the Senate in 2000, and then in 2002, it had never happened before in Oregon. We were tied 15-15. I was elected as the Republican leader, and Kate Brown was the Democrat leader. We negotiated all of December a memorandum of agreement to operate the tied Senate. This was a very tense and chaotic session, but at least the Democrats couldn't push their agenda, and neither could the Republicans. Everything that passed had to have bipartisan support. Best session. Other issues that are difficult to accept is I introduced a bill to allow retired teachers to help in the classrooms. They would not be paid but would receive credit on their taxes for hours spent in the classroom. The union killed the bill, saying they didn't want anyone in the classroom except paid teachers. In my opinion, common sense doesn't often prevail in the legislature. I'll digress just a moment in that we've had our grandson living with us for 4 years now, and each week I help out 1 day a week in the schools. And I will tell you, we have dedicated, wonderful teachers, but they do need help in the classroom. In 2003, President Bush appointed me as Region Director for Health and Human Services. As I resigned from the Senate and moved to Seattle, I drove through Terrebonne, reflecting on my tough childhood, where I had been and where I was going. I call this chapter The Outhouse to White House. In some of my speeches, I explain why I detest the outhouse. If I go to a rodeo, I don't even drink a beer for fear I'd have to use one of those things. My official duties in Seattle included the responsibility of directly working with state, local, and tribal governments in all matters related to health on behalf of Secretary Thompson. There were 350 employees in the building with whom I interacted with my job, and over 300 government programs to administer and oversee. These federal employees were hired by the previous administration and ensured me that they had permanent employee status. My region consisted of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and Alaska. In Alaska, I learned how our remote villages are very primitive when it comes to access to health care. George Bush implemented a program called Community Aid Workers for these remote villages, in which if you went through the 6th grade and you were willing to be the community aid worker, you could go to Anchorage and take a 6-week EMT program, and then you were the community health worker. Alaska has the highest suicide rate from inhaling gas fumes. Other duties included traveling to Washington, D.C. 4 times a year for meetings with the Secretary. Several amazing things happened in D.C. Getting to visit the Situation Room and realizing the coordination with all government agencies in times of crisis is incredible. We were trained in all aspects of emergency coordination in our region as well. Another experience was seeing police cars on every corner of the Capitol Mall running. The cars are actually running with a policeman sitting inside 24/7. This is since 9/11. In Seattle, I received daily briefings from Homeland Security regarding terrorist activities, bomb threats, human trafficking, and virus outbreaks. Getting back to my last chapter was coming home, not going to run for office anymore, and ended up filling a position for 1 year as county commissioner. This was my most happy experience, being home every night to cook dinner for my husband. Another great joy was meeting Arnold Palmer when I was a county commissioner. Ray says, of all the dignitaries I met with you, meeting Arnold was the best. This chapter includes much of my involvement in my community. One program is the Oregon National Guard Youth Challenge Program. Every 6 months, we bring in 135 cadets. 90% of them are from the Valley. They are east of Bend in an old federal facility. When they come in, they're tested. Their average GPA is 1.2 in reading and math. By the time they graduate from our program in 6 months, they have improved 3 and 4 grade levels. At the board meetings, we asked the cadets, why are you succeeding here and you didn't make it in the public school system? They say at here, failure is not an option. The teachers stay here with you until you get it. And they say, unfortunately, I have one of my nephews sitting in here that's a retired teacher. They say, unfortunately, their experience was that the public schools didn't care. Unfortunately, they've had teachers, and we've asked them more about it. What do you mean they didn't care? Well, they'd explain it to us, and if we asked for it the second time, they said, we told you already once, if you didn't get it, that's your tough luck. These are kids that have had a rough time, maybe don't have help at home, but unfortunately, some of our system failed them. And I also have a former school superintendent here. And I mentioned this earlier. I help 1 day a week at my grandson's class at Tumalo, and I know how hard the teachers work. But many kids are lost in the system, and our Youth Challenge program saves them. We are asked what we do there when we ask for volunteer money to help us buy uniforms and whatnot for our kids, and we say we are in the business of saving kids. I read the other day that there's a program back east where they are putting young people in senior care centers, and they interact with like nursery age kids and teenagers and all these kids, and the adults are living longer. So I told my husband, I said, I just saw this program. If you have young kids around you, you live longer. We're going to live to be 166. In closing, I want to read to you kind of what I've lived my life for, and it's a quote by Forrest Whitcraft. 100 years from now, it will not matter what kind of car I drove, what kind of house I lived in, how much I had in my bank account, nor what my clothes looked like. But the world may be a little better because I was important in the life of a child. And that, I hope, all of us will take time to be important to the life of a child. And my favorite story to close all my speeches with is a pig story. I don't think I said in there that I had 3,000 pigs. So I like pig stories. Well, it seems this pig was running down the 6-lane freeway out of San Diego. And this guy saw it and he thought, oh, that pig's going to get run over. He hasn't got a chance. So he pulled over and he got the pig in the front seat. And pretty soon an officer pulled him over and said, you can't have a pig in your front seat. That could distract you and you could have a wreck. And the guy says, well, officer, I don't know what to do with him. I don't want him to get run over, and I can't turn him out again. He says, well, why don't you take him to the San Diego Zoo? The guy says, good idea, I'll do that. So the next day, here's the guy going down the road with the same pig in the front seat, and the same officer pulls him over and says, I told you to take him to the zoo. And the guy says, oh, we did, and he loved it so much, now we're going to SeaWorld. Thank you, and I'll take questions. Any questions? Caleb, you're giving a speech about a state you researched tomorrow at school in Tumalo. Maybe everybody will ask you questions. No questions at all? Yes.
Kind of a comment of observing for as many years as I have, in the partisanship that we really are experiencing now, which isn't as bad as in DC, but it's pretty bad. And both times that we've had a tie session, it's worked wonderfully.
I agree.
I wish I knew how we didn't constantly have a tie session.
Yeah, I think,
Can you summarize Frankie's comment?
yes, what Frankie was saying is that while she's been here, and she's been here quite a few years and run this building beautifully, and her question was, 2 times in her years of observing, we've been tied. Once the Senate was tied and once the House was tied. And her question is, it went very smooth, or I wouldn't say smooth, but it was better. It was better than when you have partisan bickering and partisan unproductivity. I think my chief of staff, Randy's here. You know, Randy, was it Nebraska that's not? I think so. Yeah. I think somebody ought to take it upon themselves sometime to study how Nebraska became that way, and that we should do that. I really think that we should do that. I think with what's going on in the United States nationally, with people's opinions about who they support or oppose, as in the last 2 presidential terms we've had, has been divisive among families and people, and it's very, very sad. And I think it starts at the legislative process and gets worse at Congress. So I think we could set an example and become like another Nebraska, and I hope we do. But I'm not going to come back to change it. But that's a very good question, Frankie. Anything else?
What's the thing that you're most proud of having accomplished in this building?
Giving $100 million more when I was speaker than what Governor Kitzhaber had in his budget. Oh, yes. Former school superintendent and Senator Vern Duncan just asked, what am I most proud of that I did in this building? And my response is $100 million more than in Governor Kitzhaber's budget for K through 12. It meant that we hid the bill in the speaker's restroom, which was a ladies' room, so Governor Kitzhaber wasn't allowed in there. And we saved it until the very last session. Randy, you're just sitting back there, my former chief of staff, Randy Hildebrand. Can you think of anything else that?
No, I thought that was a good story.
Yeah.
So he wasn't able to veto it.
And he did threaten to veto it. And then after that session, of course, we had the light rail session, which was tough. That was a hard session then. My caucus was evenly split, so that was hard. Yes?
There was a couple staff persons talking about the number of bills and that sort of thing. That was one of the things you accomplished with the
Least
number of bills that is.
least number of bills introduced and passed, and we got out June 10th or something. So it was the shortest session in 35 years. It's a management process, as you know, Vern, Senator. It's a management.
And that year you funded a K-12 education, $100 million more. You didn't do the Christmas tree bill as they do probably nowadays, where you tie K-12 funding to a lot of unattractive ornaments. That's where it got its name. So
Yeah.
you funded K-12 first, and almost so they knew how much to have to go out and spend in each district.
Yeah, to summarize what Randy just said, I forgot to do that, Joan, thank you, is that he was saying that after we passed the bill on the K through 12 and kept it from having a Christmas tree bill, which had all the goodies that everybody wanted to buy their vote, and we didn't allow that to happen. So we were able to fund education and hold the bill to the last, but make sure that the money was there for the education bill.
Another question. Do you think if you'd stayed in the Senate instead of going to Washington to the DC job, that you might have become the president of the Senate too? And been speaker and president? There's a couple of people have done that.
Yes, but no woman has done it. And I'm the only woman that was leader in the House and the Senate, and I'm very, very proud of that, but also very humble about that, because that means your members support you. So your question was, had I not gone to Seattle for the appointment to HHS, Health and Human Services, and had I stayed, do I think I'd be Senate President? Well, when we were tied, it was very difficult to come up with who was going to be Senate president. So a little inside politics is that I met Senator Courtney downtown Salem. We had coffee, and I said, I've got enough votes in my caucus to make you Senate president. And we did that, and then met to develop the memorandum after that. And as often happens in politics, there was not enough in Kate's caucus to elect her, and I lacked one in my caucus, and probably she lacked one, maybe, who knows. But I am very proud of Senator Courtney, and he's done a great job. So I don't know if I ever would have been, after being Speaker of the House, what I said about people fighting at your backside all the time is really true. I think leadership is the way you can get things done, but you pay a high price to be in leadership. And lots of people pay with their health, and you don't have much time for family and at home. So, and right now, my focus is on helping kids. Yes, Karen.
I have a question about, I mean, it's hard enough being a legislator, but being leadership. And what would be your best tip, and like, how did you manage a caucus? Very diverse, all the same party, but very diverse opinions, and getting people to work together as a caucus.
Karen's question was, how did you manage the caucus? I tried to manage the caucus with more kindness than what I thought I saw sometimes. I admired Vera Katz. She said anything, and her members hopped to it. And I tried to have a different method, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But I just, from my experiences, I just think that you get more, what is it, with honey? With honey, and I don't like the taste of vinegar. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. There were times when I'd have everybody loyal, and then somebody jump ship. So it's just really hard. Don't get into leadership unless you're sure you can work well with other people. And I think generally, most of the time, I had most of my members of my caucus behind me. But I do think that members of a caucus either have to stick together, or I'd like to see them not have caucuses, as Frankie mentioned, and have it maybe just have it be run by, let's see, you could put all the people in the rural areas and the people in the city and put them in a room until they got along. I'll tell you, Margaret Carter gave me the one vote I needed to stop a big fee that Senator Durfler was putting on studded tires, and I got people over in Eastern Oregon can't afford to pay a fee on studded tires. And so I went to Margaret Carter and asked her to vote with me, and she was the one vote that helped kill the studded tire bill. So there aren't enough rural people to get anything done unless they work with the people in the city, and it's our obligation, in my opinion, to make sure that they understand what our rural needs are. You can't just expect them to understand, and vice versa. I didn't know what it was like to be in the city. I didn't know you couldn't park hogs in Lake Oswego. I mean, when you think about it, little plain things like I cut somebody off in traffic going to work in the Twilliger curves. I mean, we got worse curves than that, going down into Clarno, Oregon. But she gave me this terrible finger gesture. And I literally cried. I mean, we don't do that to each other over there. So, I mean, we need to each understand each other as Democrats and Republicans, but we also need to understand each other as rural people and people from the urban areas. And I address that in my book a great deal. Yes.
I found out how to solve that problem.
Yes.
Being in an urban area, I married a gal from Malheur County.
Well, Malheur County, yes.
She kept me honest.
What Senator Duncan just said is that he found out how to avoid that problem by marrying a gal from Malheur County, and that is a wonderful county, and you did well. And behind you, yes.
Let me follow that up, since I've spent almost 40 years in Oregon and 20 of them were in rural areas of
big chapter on that.
I'll read the book.
What was your name?
Peter Wong.
I knew that, Randy. I knew that. So, Randy and I really enjoyed your reporting. You're very good. So his question was,
I mean, when I first came here, yes, there were people obviously living in urban areas, but I know rural legislators felt they had a say-so in running this place.
yes. Peter Wong. Who are you with now?
Pamplin Media.
Pamplin
Does
Media.
own papers in your home area.
Yes. And his question was what I think about the urban-rural split. You cannot close down the forests over an owl that you find out later was eaten by a different kind of an owl, and let peregrine falcons nest on the Fremont Bridge and let traffic go by. That's hypocritical. And the people in rural Oregon go, wait a minute, why do you do that? And we can't let owls be in our forest. I mean, that's kind of a crazy one, but I think the main thing is that there's more urban legislators and they have the majority of power regardless of which party they're in, and they make a one-size-fits-all bill. Well, one size doesn't fit all, or we'd all be size 12 or 40. But it doesn't fit all, and what's good over here doesn't necessarily fit the eastern and Oregon and southern Oregon. My dad's family of 12 people, all 6 boys and 6 girls. All the girls were educated, but the boys were in logging. And they were good stewards of the land. And agriculture people, my kids grew up on a farm, wheat farm. You take care of the land, make sure it doesn't blow away. The topsoil blows away, you don't have anything to farm. So quite frankly, you take good care of the land or you don't have it. There's lots of issues like that, whether it's water or whatever. And I used to say, you know, when you come over to eastern Oregon, or whether it's there or southern Oregon or the coast, can be considerate of other people's property. We had cattle out on what my husband turned into the Badlands Wilderness, east of Bend, 30,000 acres where we ran cattle. We finally gave up the land because raising cattle on it because people would come out to see the Badlands and they would leave gates open. I mean, you don't have to grow up. I mean, when you do grow up in eastern Oregon, you know, you find the gate closed, you leave it closed. Simple things like that. Does that answer your question? Way more than you think. Another one? Another one? I thought somebody else back there. Did you raise your hand, Caleb? I'll talk to you later.
Well, I'm just gonna, you were absolutely fun and fantastic to work with.
Thank you. Thank you. I love you too. Thank you. Thank you very much.